brief stakeholders.
So how many planes are in the air? Between 11:42, we're talking to stakeholders?
There's a number of planes that are in the air at that time. The precise number I can't say that would be crossing the Tasman. It's a relatively busy time of day.
It is. It is. So a lot's happening in the air at that point in time.
That's correct.
So what are you having to do? What are your air traffic controllers having to do in that sort of...
The decision...
Well, 9:58 to 11:42.
The decision as to what to do with the hazard alert. So we provide the information. We report it as a hazard alert for pilots in command to be informed and make a decision. And pilots sought diversions around the latitude and longitude that the Virgin pilot received in the initial transmission. They sought to divert, and over the course of Friday, some 49 aircraft in total diverted. Some of that was the aircraft that were in the air at the time that we first became aware of it. Many of them were flights afterwards that subsequently flight planned to simply reroute around the airspace.
Mm. And so when were flight plans returned to normal?
The flight plans continued to divert throughout the weekend
Right.
as a matter of precaution, and I'd have to check on the status now, but I believe they were still diverting earlier today. The vessels have moved to the south in the Tasman. Actually, I beg your pardon. We had a timestamp this morning with the group having moved further south away from the airways, and as they're not anywhere near the airway structure between Australia and New Zealand, flights were not needing to divert.
Okay, so did Defence provide Air Services Australia with notice of the task group's live firing exercise, or it was the other way around?
That's
Air
correct.
Services Australia provided the information to
correct,
Defence.
Senator. We became aware through the Virgin flight.
Through the Virgin flight. Were Air Services Australia required to respond to the second live firing exercise?
Air Services Australia was already responding. Industry was already diverting around the latitude and longitudes which were provided by Defence.
Okay, so you were ahead of Defence on this?
I wouldn't say we were ahead.
It's not a...
We became aware of the situation because
And then you fed that information in?
Correct.
Excellent. And no one was harmed. Yeah, go for it.
Did before you knew of the live firing, were you aware of the location of the ships?
No, Senator.
Okay. Since you've found out over the last few days, have you established where the ships were and where the live firing occurred?
Senator, we put in place a range of measures, including engagement with the HQ JOC, whereby they provided us with information where updates on the lat long of the vessel, and any change in disposition was the arrangements we had in place.
Were those ships located on a typical flight path from New Zealand to Australia?
Senator, there's a number of flight paths that go, as you'd imagine, from Sydney across to various cities in New Zealand. From Brisbane, they all sort of converge to the south-east there. Yes, the locations during Friday and Saturday were generally where there's a number of flight paths. Right.
It would not appear to be a coincidence where they were then. Okay. All right, thank you.
Can I just ask one question? So when the Australian Navy conducts these type of activities, is there a different procedure from an air services perspective for domestic live fire versus a foreign power?
Senator, there's normally notifications. There's a thing called a NOTAM, a Notice to Airmen, which is issued. So there's normally coordination in Australian administered airspace. We obviously have very close ties indeed with our Defence colleagues. And so, yes, that's the case. And more broadly throughout the Pacific region, there are instances in neighbouring flight information regions where, for example, the French Navy may undertake activities, and we become aware of that through notices to airmen.
And so normally, what would your NOTAM notice be?
24 to 48 hours.
24 to 48 hours. And you can confirm here, and the appropriate place for a live fire, whether it's domestic or a foreigner, as you say with the French, is to notify Air Services Australia 24 to 48, and then you can do your requisite change to flight plans to keep everybody safe.
Senator, that's the procedure that the
So
Australian military...
you're saying that that's the normal procedure, if you're doing, and that's a known procedure internationally, because
it would tend to be the case, I think. Yes.
yes, well, your chair's
The
just said
advice,
it's not just the Australian Navy that does it. Other navies provide
yes.
appropriate.
It is a protocol, absolutely.
It's a protocol, right? But the Chinese Navy did not provide any NOTAM.
That's correct.
Correct.
We were not
No
contacted.
NOTAM. The only way you knew about this was because a Virgin pilot heard about it
That's
and
correct.
called in.
Correct.
Correct. Thank you, Virgin pilot. And sorry, you did say how far away from the live firing exercise the Virgin plane was at the time. How, 300 nautical miles?
No, Senator, I didn't say
No,
that.
sorry.
I'm not aware of how far away the Virgin pilot was. It was within range of VHF, so...
He just heard on his communication.
Correct. Within line of sight. That could be a couple of hundred miles.
Within line of sight.
Sorry, within... you can pick up a radio signal at the altitude the Virgin aircraft was at, out to about 250 nautical miles.
250
So
nautical
I don't
miles.
know exactly the distance.
So it would be within 250 nautical miles for the Virgin pilot to pick that signal up.
Approximately.
Yep. I'm not going to... It's not a test.
Yeah.
You can't fail. For him then, him or her, pilot to call that into you. And then
correct.
everybody swung into action.
That's correct, Senator.
Quite incredible. What level of interoperability is there between Air Services Australia system and our defence system with respect to these type of incidents?
Senator, we have a liaison between ourselves and HQ JOC through our National Operations Centre. In terms of system integration, there is no specific system integration that I think that's necessarily relevant here. Our radar systems are designed for aircraft to be seeking to be identified. They require a corresponding piece of equipment on board the aircraft, so they're a passive system. The military systems are quite different.
Right. And any was quite seamless between Australian airspace and New Zealand?
We engaged our New Zealand counterparts,
Yep.
Airways New Zealand is their name, as well as had engagement with the New Zealand Civil Aviation Safety Authority.
Yep.
They participated in telephone calls, teleconferences that we held with industry so that we were sharing information.
And what time did you contact New Zealand?
It's in 12:08.
12:08. So by 11:42, everything was being diverted appropriately. Everybody informed, bar the New Zealanders, but we got to them within the half hour.
And Senator, just for clarity, by 12 o'clock we held an industry telephone conference. It was at 12 o'clock that we
So
held it.
who's on the industry telephone conference,
So
please?
Qantas, Virgin, Jetstar. We had Air New Zealand on at a later point.
But on the midday?
I'd have to check on that exact call. We had a number of calls throughout the day and a number of calls into the evening and the next day, and expanded the list. We also emailed all of our contacts at all the international airlines so that they would become aware of it as well.
Mr Sharp or Mr Curran, when did you contact the Minister?
The Minister's office was contacted, Mr Stoddart.
What time?
Thank you, Mr Sharp, Paul Stoddart, Chief Customer and External Relations Officer. Senator, I think Mr Curran had said 11:42 a.m. 11:42 a.m.
The Minister's office was...
We had contacted the Minister's office at 11:42 a.m.
Okay, and just to remind me again, when did the Virgin pilot call it in?
9:58 a.m.
9:58 a.m.
And Senator, the department had informed the Minister's office through those initial calls we had with CASA and the department at 11:20.
11:20, okay. And can you confirm whether the Minister for Defence and the Minister for Foreign Affairs were aware? before or after 11:20?
We can't confirm that.
No, we
Senator.
can't confirm that.
So that is a question for Defence.
Senator, yes.
Yes,
And
Senator.
Defence were aware at 10:18 a.m. Is that correct, or have I?
10 a.m. is when
10 a.m.
Air
is when
Services National Operations Centre contacted Defence HQ JOC. 10 a.m.
10 a.m. Defence was
Approximately, I
aware.
have a little approximate squiggle, so it'll be plus or minus a minute or two.
All right. Thank you very much, gentlemen and ladies.
Senator Waters, I know you want questions for the Air Services.
Thank you. It's on a different topic. It's about Brisbane Airport. So thank you. In 2024, in late 2024, Minister King issued a directive for Air Services to prioritise greater use of sod props at Brisbane Airport to be implemented by 30 November 2024. And at the last estimates, I think it might have been you, Mr Curran, you said that a forecast doubling of sod props usage to about 5.3% was possible for 2025 following the directive from the Minister. I note that for the period from 1 December 2024, so just after the directive was issued, to the 15th of Feb, there's only 1.9% of flights that are using sod props, which is like only about a third of what you'd hoped for. So how do you account for this shortfall, and how do you intend to meet that 5% target or 5.3% target for the rest of the year?
Senator, I'll kick off and then I'll pass to Mr Curran. The 5.3% is a number that we still believe is achievable. Mm-hmm. Just bear in mind that's an annual number, and so it's subject to weather and also to traffic volume when you can actually operate the sod props.
Yep.
The wettest part of the year happens to be December and January. During the winter cooler months, you'd see that percentage being much higher.
Okay.
And the 5.3% we believe is achievable. It's very similar to what we achieved regularly over 20 years in Sydney. So we believe it is very achievable. But Mr Curran.
Thank you, Mr Sharp. Senator, thank you. And just to build on that a little, you're quite correct with the numbers. We produce a daily and monthly presentation on our website so that communities can understand exactly the circumstances when we were able to run the sod props mode. We understand the interest in it. We understand it is the most beneficial in terms of community noise impacts, and we seek to run it in those times when we can. Importantly, the hours in which we can run sod props is limited by a number of factors, largely weather. The runway has to be dry, the wind conditions need to be appropriate, and the traffic levels need to be not too high. Over the last, since the ministerial direction was presented, we've been able to run the sod props mode when possible, when it's actually safe and possible to do so. For those hours that it's possible, 95% of the time we have done so. When we haven't done so, we've published the reason why in a reason code that goes on our website to explain the reason. And it's typically operational reasons to do with other traffic. That could be an emergency services helicopter that's in the airspace at the time, or other factors of that nature. But in general terms, when we are able to run sod props, we are doing so.
Okay. If you could please on notice just run me through, you gave me one example of why perhaps the 5% wasn't used. There was an emergency helicopter or something, yes, for example. Can you just on notice, please, just list for me the instances that meant that you couldn't do sod props 100% of the time when you otherwise might have been able to? Thank you.
Senator, yes.
I'm interested, please, now in the Senate inquiry recommendations, the inquiry into aircraft noise that Air Services was a witness before. What role will Air Services play in supporting the establishment of an independent aircraft noise ombudsman separate from its own structure, which is what recommendation 17 suggested?
Senator, thank you. Recommendation 17 is a recommendation that the Australian Government undertake activity. So Air Services will support the Australian Government in whatever steps it takes with regard to that recommendation. And I think I should say the evidence I heard earlier from department officials with regard to where this process is at, I understand the Government hasn't yet accepted or made a decision as to the recommendations. So Air Services obviously is guided and informed by government position. However, there are a number of recommendations that Air Services was working toward, and sod props was one of them, which we've just canvassed, along with a number of others that I'd be happy to provide updates on if that's appropriate.
Yes, if you could, that would be great. Just briefly, if you don't mind.
Thank you, Senator. So mindful that those that are matters of government policy, I won't turn to today. That's something that the department will come back to you on, I understand. Recommendation 4 dealt with sod props. We've just elaborated on that. Recommendation 5, we provided some response in question on notice SQ24 1332. That matter dealt with continuous descent operations and continuous climb operations out of Brisbane, Sydney and Melbourne. Air Services have been undertaking a number of trials under the sort of overarching banner of continuous descent operations. And specifically, we've been undertaking a predictable sequencing trial. CDO is continuous descent operations are quite complex to do in busy environments, and for context, an airport like Sydney, Brisbane or Melbourne, we're typically looking to have aircraft arriving have somewhere between a 45 and a 50-second runway occupancy time. So we're very time bound in what we're trying to do in terms of maintaining capacity into those environments. So predictable sequencing is a really important enabler to allow aircraft to go from cruising to descending and not being vectored, sped up and slowed down by air traffic control. So to do that in those busy environments, we require quite a number of airspace and system changes, and that will take some time with a number of challenges for us to do it. In Brisbane, we are progressing some predictable sequencing trials on some specific routes to the south at specific times of the day, and we plan that from June this year. I would like to
from June, did you say?
To start from June this year. I would like to, I guess, just caution the benefits communities may experience from that in the initial phases. The predictable sequencing will tend to give a benefit in terms of the initial descent phase, which is at higher altitudes, and so the next phases are likely to be where we get to a stage where communities may experience less noise because aircraft aren't having to slow up and or speed up, slow down or speed up due to air traffic control, trying to manage that runway occupancy time that I referenced earlier.
Okay,
so it's quite a process. It's quite complicated.
That means you're hoping, and I'm sure Brisbane residents will be hoping that come June, when you're trialling that continuous descent, that it will be less noisy. Is that what you just said?
Senator, I'm cautioning that be the expectation. I'm saying that this is an early stage.
Oh, right. You're saying don't have that hope. Sorry,
Senator, we
it's
need
late.
Senator, we need to progress in stages here, and without the right redesign of the airspace, it's going to take a number of years until we're able to implement continuous descent operations right the way down to the runway. And there are no major airports in the world where CDO is deployed from top of descent down to the runway. Heathrow does it from 6,000 feet in a limited fashion. That's the only major airport in the world that's having much success with this, and they have quite a different design than we have here.
Okay, so hope is not allowed.
I'm just cautious not to overplay expectations. We are investing into this, but it will take time.
Okay, and is the purpose of that to have a noise reduction ultimately, or is there some other purpose?
Ultimately, it will lead to noise reduction. It will also lead to efficiencies for operations as well, and CO2 reductions.
Okay, thank you. I do have a few other questions. I'm conscious of time. Perhaps if you did have any other recs that you were already doing something about, would you mind popping them on notice for me? Thank you. Have you done anything in relation to recommendation 13, noting, as you mentioned, that the government hasn't adopted it yet, but recommendation 13 was for a full review of Brisbane's airspace following significant community impacts of recent flight path changes. Have you done anything in that space?
So the recommendation 13 is a matter of government policy. As I read it, it says Air Services considers for metropolitan airports which add a new or expanded runway to conduct a full-scale review of broader airspace in the greater metropolitan area, and that is a matter of government policy.
Okay, so you won't do that until government asks you to do that.
That's
okay.
Well,
just the aviation white paper. When will Air Services Australia begin publishing quarterly reports on non-compliance with noise abatement procedures?
Senator Paul Stoddard, Chief Customer and External Relations Officer. As I understand it, we are publishing monthly reports for Brisbane, Senator. Have been doing so for around about 6 months, and we are planning to publish noise abatement procedure reports for the other major airports by March, so next month.
Okay, that's great. And can I find them on a website somewhere?
The Brisbane one you can, and the others that I mentioned in March will also be on the website.
Okay, great. Have you done, or when will you do, an examination of your noise and flight path monitoring system and include additional information in that on aircraft movements and noise impacts? Is that underway? That one's for air services. I think the aviation white paper suggested that occur. And just wondering whether you...
initiative number on that one? Is there an initiative number?
Probably, but I don't have it.
No, okay. We'll have to take that on notice. I'm not quite sure the specific reference there.
Okay, Senator. No worries. And is there an intention to publicly release all historic and future data from the noise and flight path monitoring system?
We'll have to take that question on notice as well, Senator.
Okay. And will you commit to real-time public reporting of noise threshold breaches?
So we'd have to take that one on notice also.
Okay. And if you'll indulge me, I have just a handful of very quick questions from my Hobartian colleague. So Air Services Australia has been reviewing the Hobart Airport flight paths for a number of years and still has not provided a timeframe for a decision. The Hobart community would like to know when a decision will be made. What is the timeframe for a decision on reviewing the Hobart Airport flight paths?
Senator, thank you. There's a number of initiatives underway in Hobart. If I could be specific, they're known through their recommendation numbers. Recommendation 5 reference the noise abatement procedure, and we did undertake a trial throughout the course of 2024. We've actually finalised that trial and assessed the trial data against the criteria, the success criteria, which we published and consulted the community on, and we've formalised that and implemented that permanently. So we took that decision on the 14th of December. In terms of recommendation 4 and recommendation 6, yes. Which are two recommendations that we've been progressing. The background to these is we undertook a post-implementation review. These are community-suggested options which we've been engaging. It's fair to say that the community-suggested recommendations where the flight path moves away from one community to another, there is varying views from which community will be newly impacted. So recommendation 4, the feedback we've had is basically split, and that's around a shifting a flight path about 3 to 5 kilometres to the east of its current location.
That was 2 to 3 kilometres, but anyway, carry on.
Okay, thank you. Recommendation 6, the feedback we've received from community is largely around 70% is against the change and 30% is for the change, and that's to move a flight path over water and Maria Island. So we've received quite a lot of feedback, 193 submissions. We're working our way through that, and we plan to make an announcement around our intentions on any implementation, if we go to implement, in Q2 this year, so before June this year.
Yep, okay, thank you. Now, I think the Hobart folk are also waiting...
We have a 9:15 break.
Oh, really? Can I just get this one question out?
Yeah, absolutely.
Right? Honestly, the last one. Thank you.
Fine, thank you.
So the Hobart folk are waiting on a decision regarding recommendations made that they made through the 2022 Air Services post-implementation review. I think that's what you just referred to.
That's correct.
So they wanted to know about Rec 4 and they wanted to know about Rec 6, and you've just told me Q2. And can I ask, finally, has the government asked you, Air Services Australia, for any advice from them in relation to the inquiry recommendations? The Senate inquiry into aircraft noise recommendations. Sorry, I jumped around a bit because I'm running out of time. Have the government asked you for your input into the Senate recs?
Yes, Senator, we work closely with the department to feed into their response on a whole range of recommendations from that inquiry.
Okay, can you tell me what you told them?
Senator, there are numerous recommendations, and so we would be contributing to specific recommendations that affect Air Services.
Yep.
If you want me to provide...
Perhaps on notice, that would be great.
Sure.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Senator Waters. We'll now break till 9, excuse me, for 15 minutes to 9... whatever it is, 32. Yeah, 9:33 at 17. 15 minutes, 9:32. Thanks very much. Okay, let's suspend. Hansard Broadcasting. Welcome back, everyone. Thank you. In continuation, Air Services Australia, Senator Canavan.
Okay, I just wanted to ask some quick questions about workforce. There's been some reports only last week, I think, in the Herald Sun that up to 85 additional air traffic controllers are expected to be endorsed this year. How many of those are brand new controllers?
Thank you, Senator. We recruited in about 109 new air traffic controllers over the last 12 months, largely resolving the shortage that had been in existence. If you're referring specifically to Melbourne, I'd have to refer to Mr Curran.
Senator, thank you. I think the 85 number is a number that we are planning to recruit and have endorsed this year. So to your specific answer, are they new controllers? Yes, they are, Senator. They'll be a mixture of ab initio controllers, so people who have first learned to do air traffic control with Air Services Australia, and also international recruits and potentially recruits from domestic, but people who have experience doing air traffic control.
So are any of them cross-endorsed controllers?
No, Senator, that's something that's an internal activity that is separate to the 85 you're referring to. The 85 is new air traffic controllers that we plan to bring in to the system throughout the course of this year.
Right. How many trainees are currently in the training college?
Just a moment, Senator. We've got 42 air traffic control trainees currently in the system that could become endorsed by June 30 this year. There's another number that will come in throughout the year, but I don't have that on me at the moment.
And how long does it take? How long do you have to spend in the training college?
For an ab initio air traffic controller to come from walking in the door to being endorsed, approximately 18 months, depending on where they go. For experienced air traffic controllers, in the vicinity of 6 months, depending on their background and depending on where we post them to.
So going the 42 to the 85, is that going to be made up by people who have already got experience?
Senator, the 42 air traffic controllers I mentioned are scheduled to be endorsed by June 30 this year.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, but there's a gap there because you're saying there's 85.
We have other air traffic controllers in the training system who will be scheduled to be endorsed between June this year and December of this year. I just don't have that number on me. I was working to this financial year.
Right.
But it's 85 in total is what we're expecting. There's an attrition rate in there.
Well, that was my next question. Are you assuming an attrition rate to get to your 85?
That's correct, Senator. The attrition rate's been across all of our streams. That's en route, approach and tower in the mid-60s. So it's been higher than, sorry, the pass rate. The pass rate.
Okay, so 40% attrition.
Mid-60s, about 65. So we're at 35%. That's higher than we would like, and we're working to refine.
Just to clarify, there's a bit of confusion. So 60% pass.
Around 65%.
65 and 35% attrition.
That's correct.
Put it the other way. Still pretty high. You still think
it is, Senator. We're aiming more for about 75%. It's traditionally, and not only in Australia but globally, a role that, notwithstanding the fact that the candidates pass the exams to come into the system, that there is an attrition rate given the high safety standards and expectations we have throughout the program.
So last year, or last financial year, I've got a quote from Air Services saying that we have introduced 53 new endorsed air traffic controllers into our operations, and we're continuing to recruit and train new controllers with an additional 37 anticipated to be endorsed by the end of December 2024. How many of those 37 were endorsed?
Senator, I have to go back on that timestamp and take that on notice. As I said, working to the end of this financial year.
Okay, you might put some of these on notice. Okay, with the 85, like how does that compare to previous years? Was the 53 I mentioned earlier, was that what it was last year?
Senator, it's an increase. So the number I have is that we ended up having 52, a combination of ab initio and experienced actually passed the training from start to finish.
That's last year?
Last calendar year.
Yep.
1 January to 31 December, that's right. So 85 is an increase, but one...
Going back further, I mean, roughly, have you ever got anywhere near 85 before in a year?
Senator, we're certainly increasing our training pipeline to I would say, record highs at this time, but we would have trained more than 52 in the system at some point. Yes, I would need to take it on notice if you want the specific year.
Okay, so how much overtime is being worked at the moment by air traffic controllers?
Senator, the overtime levels at national level are currently we have for our air traffic control workforce an average of 168 hours per annum. And that works through to about 6.4 hours per fortnight. Our air traffic controllers are employed on a 36-hour week, so it's about an extra 3 hours a week, which is slightly less than a 40-hour fortnight. That's at average.
Have any managers been reprimanded or laid off for not being able to fill overtime shifts?
Senator, no.
Okay. What's the maximum number of overtime that some are working at the moment? Is there a limit on it?
Senator, we have a fairly sophisticated fatigue management system, and the fatigue management system operates at a number of levels. It looks at the roster that's proposed to be worked and ensures that is within acceptable fatigue bands, and then looks tactically at what's actually been worked, allowing for changes that happen in reality, including requests for overtime. The maximum air traffic control overtime that we have in the system is quite high in some parts, and we have a number of air traffic controllers that are still operating within our fatigue management limits, but that are doing significant levels of overtime. And in some of those cases, they're actually part-time employees as well. So when we look at their actual hours per fortnight, it's higher than the normal hours that a full-time employee works, but you need to allow for that fact that they're actually working part-time to start with.
Right. How many air traffic controls have left in the last 6 months?
Senator, the air traffic control attrition in the last this year, we've had one air traffic controller resign, and I have the details for 2024 calendar year. Just a moment. We've had 19 air traffic controllers depart in total throughout the course of 2024 calendar year, but only 3 of those were straight-up resignations. The rest were retirements or a loss of essential qualifications. So we've had very little attrition in the last 12 months, perhaps lower than normal. Typically, we've seen around 2 per month leave the organisation, about 24, 25 a year. It was a little low last year.
Okay. And you said earlier, I believe, that you're hoping that staff levels will be back to a more resilient, I think was the word you used, by mid this year?
Yes, well, as we speak today, technically our staff numbers are back to where they were pre-COVID,
right.
But that doesn't give you a resilient roster. So if someone calls in sick, you need a standby person, is my view, in some of the biggest cities. We need to get to June with the next round to be able to achieve that resilience level. So I refer that to as roster resilience.
Yep.
June's our target date for that.
All right. Anything else?
Just one little question about an email sent to managers on December the 13th. The Acting Chief Services Delivery Officer warned, and I quote, "If luck runs out and shifts that have been blank for a while go to T-bar, the wash-up of that will be a different discussion to a short notice dive discussion." Was that A, sent, and B, it sounds like a threat for managers not to go to T-bar at any cost, otherwise they'll lose their positions.
Senator, I'm not aware of that email. Could you say who it was sent from?
My understanding is it was sent from the Acting Chief Services Delivery Officer.
Can you table that?
I can't table the whole email. You'd understand, Senator Searle,
No,
like
I
whistleblowers.
This will have to be black. I get
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
Senator, that position I don't think existed in December last year.
Yep, well, I can go back and check,
Yeah,
but my concern is that you do have some staff that are doing hundreds of hours of overtime.
Yes.
Yes. And we've discussed many times in this space about T-bar use incidents being called not because there's an actual issue in the airspace, it's because we can't staff Air Services Australia appropriately, and then the flow-on impact of those incidences into the aviation sector more broadly and to customers?
Senator, I could certainly say that we put a really concerted effort into our service performance through the Christmas and holiday season. We were looking at staffing levels, minimising leave where we could, minimising any air traffic controllers that were on projects, minimising training, pulling all the levers that we reasonably could to make sure our workforce was facing the front to deliver services to the airline industry through what was one of the busiest periods that we've had in the last many years.
Okay, so my advice is that it was sent in December 2024 from Mr Sharker.
Okay. I'm not
so
aware
I'll get
of
you
the
to
email.
follow up on that behind the scenes, because that does sound like a threat to me. Thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Good. Okay. Thank you very much, Air Services. Travel safe. And we'll now call... who are we going to call now? CASA. Oh, CASA. Thank you. Ghostbusters. Yeah, that's what was going through my head. I'm going to deal with the senators who are in the room, and I'm not chasing anyone who's not. There we go. Fair enough. Okay, welcome, Ms Spence. Okay, do you wish to make a very brief opening statement?
No.
Fantastic, thank you very much. Questions, Senator McKenzie?
Thank you so much. Thank you, Casa. I'd like to ask about the coroner's findings following the inquest into the death of Matt Farrell. Coroner Laurie was highly critical of both RAAUS and CASA. Can you confirm whether CASA has formally responded to the findings?
Senator, no, we've got 3 months to respond to the findings, but in terms of the 3 recommendations, the 3 recommendations, 2 of them we've essentially addressed through engagement with RAAUS over the last few months, and the third one was around a review that they're suggesting, so we're just working through what that actually looks like in practice. But I'm happy to get Andreas Marcellia to give you more information about what we've done around our oversight of RAAUS, if that's helpful.
Yes,
Senator.
I would like to understand the response with RAAUS, given the coroner found that they'd engaged in the illegal withholding of information and had deficiency in its management of licensing. It operates under a self-administration model that's overseen by CASA. So what steps have you taken to address this governance failure?
Thanks, Senator. Andreas Marcellia, Executive Manager for the Stakeholder Engagement Division. That includes the oversight of sports aviation bodies. Senator, there wasn't any finding of illegal withholding, as I'd understood it. There was some suggestions that information wasn't shared with CASA that perhaps could have been, but the assessment at the time was, well, let me put it this way, there was no obligation to share the information that the coroner suggested should have been.
That was to...
Why did the coroner think it should have been shared?
Senator, can I just clarify, are you talking about information that should have been shared with the coroner or information that should have been shared with CASA? Because I think...
I'm just suggesting that the coroner found that they withheld information that they should have actually released and had deficiencies in their management of the licensing situation. So I want to understand what CASA's done with RAAUS in responding to those governance failure, and have you conducted any internal reviews or audits to determine whether your oversight of RAAUS is adequate?
Thanks, Senator. I'm happy to run you through that. So we provide oversight of all the self-administering organisations. Yep. Part of that includes regular surveillance. So we've had a number of routine kind of audit and surveillance events of RAAUS. When findings were identified, they were promptly acquitted. Following the information that came to light during the coronial inquest, we conducted some response surveillance and went in and specifically looked at the way that RAAUS issues pilot licences and assesses competencies, and we were satisfied with that. So the most of the criticisms that the coroner made were around the conduct of the coronial inquest rather than RAAUS's interaction with CASA or our oversight of CASA. Oh, sorry, our oversight of RAOs. There were a couple of findings, as Ms Spence said, that related specifically to whether actions were taken for individual pilots. Most of those were dealt with middle of last year. We're now going through the coroner's report in detail. We've only had it for a little over a week to make sure that there's nothing specific that we've missed.
Are you going to do a more formal review of self-administration arrangements?
So with respect to RAOs, like I say, we're going through the detail. We do have a audit scheduled of the general oversight of sports bodies and self-administering organisations. So our Board Audit Committee, our Board Audit and Risk Committee has a regular program of independent audits and assurance audits, and as it happens, there's an audit commencing around the 149, which is the self-administering scheme, over the next month or so, which is looking at generally how does CASA acquit itself of oversight responsibilities for those organisations.
And Senator, what we will be doing is reviewing the feedback, the findings from the coroner, and making sure that the scope of that internal audit does address any issues that come to light.
Do you have full confidence in RAOS's ability to conduct proper oversight of its members, given the concerns raised in the inquest?
Yes, Senator.
And given that CASA's Executive Manager of Regulatory Oversight, Mr Matt Bertel, was formerly the CEO of RAOS, what steps have you taken to ensure that there are no conflicts of interest or perceived conflicts of interest in how this matter is being handled?
So we, where do I start? So in relation to Mr Butel, we did give, well, I gave a lot of consideration to the information that had been provided as the coronial was progressing, and as whether it was actually appropriate for him to stay in his role. I'm extremely conscious of the fact that nothing has actually been proven. There have been allegations, and there'll now be a process which has been referred to the Victorian DPP in order to ensure that, and I wouldn't describe it as a conflict of interest, I'd describe it more in making sure that the regulatory decisions that CASA makes are above question. So while we're waiting for the Victorian DPP to review the issues, or refer to the Victorian Police to review the issues, Mr Butel doesn't take any regulatory decisions. They are either managed at the appropriate delegation level within the organisation, or if someone more senior needs to make them, then I'm making them. And Mr Butel is responsible just for the financial and staffing matters around the management of the Regulatory Oversight Division.
So what conversations have, or discussions?
Oh, sorry, Senator, can I just add?
Yep.
And he has nothing to do with the work that CASA does in terms of the oversight of RAOs.
Okay, good.
Yep.
What discussions have you had with RAOs regarding potential reforms following the coroner's findings?
As Mr Marcellia said, we've only just received the coroner's report, and while we had some visibility of issues that might be raised, we are working our way through that. And
so there's been no discussions with RAOs?
Not in terms of reforms, no, but we have been working with them just to make sure that we could have the necessary level of assurance that they're doing the job that they're required to do under the
And so
legislation.
can you commit to this committee that CASA will conduct an independent review of the oversight of RAOs?
Yes, Senator, that's what Mr Marcellia referred to.
Yeah, because that was a standard review.
Yeah. No, that is actually done by someone independent of CASA. We have
but something we're going to do. It was going to begin next month.
But as I said,
that
that will be independent of CASA staff. It's actually done by an independent auditor. Appreciate
that. But will you specifically go to this issue in what seems like a regular review process for yourself?
Yes, Senator, that's what I was saying. We will look at what the coroner has said and see if the scope that we'd already discussed for that audit needs to be amended to address any of the issues that have come through the coroner's report.
Thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Sure, Senator Canavan.
Look, I just have some questions about applications for an air operator's certificate. I've just been contacted by someone where it seems to have taken a long time. Do you have KPIs or targets for how long it should take to assess an application for an AOC?
Senator, it's a great question. It's something that we've been working on a lot over the last 18 months or so. We've now got it for our Client Services Centre for approvals for individuals, and we're hoping to publish, hopefully by the end of this week, if not early next week, the first sort of round of our service level standards and how we're tracking against those standards.
Right.
So it's a work in progress, but we want to be really transparent about saying both how long it should take and how long it's actually taking. So when people do have issues where they feel it's taken too long, we can be very clear.
So you don't have a set standard at the moment or a target?
We have got in the regulations, there are sometimes sort of timeframes set how long we have to do things by, within 90 days of receipt and things like that. But what we're trying to do is break it down by all the regulatory services that we provide and then report against how we're actually tracking. And for those ones where there's a time frame that's set in the regulations, then we'll include that. But for others, we'll look at what our median time frame is, and that will become essentially our service level standard. And hopefully over time, we'll be able to improve how quickly we're turning things around.
Well, the person that's contacted me has been waiting 9 months. Now, to be fair, there was some apparent discussion, I think about 6 months ago, about presumably the conditions or some such of the approval. But apparently it's been about 6 months now waiting. And I suppose the more concerning thing, and this is obviously just what I've been told, I'm not going to go into the specific person here, but I might be interested to catch up later if we can, that they have tried to email or make contact and discuss, the situation and haven't had any luck. Is there some kind of bar on communicating with someone that has an application in?
No, not at all, Senator. We've been encouraging our staff that they should. The other thing that we do have within our system is the Industry Complaints Commissioner, and everyone should feel that they operate at arm's length, report to the board and operate at arm's length to management. So that'd be another option.
Well, as I said, I might catch up with you later on that if we can. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thanks, Senator Canavan. Ms Spence, I may suggest to you bolt, because there's a certain senator who wants to come and ask questions, and maybe around COVID. So I'm giving you a free pass. Get out of here.
Thank you, Senator.
Okay, we'll now call Infrastructure Australia.
Wait.
Ms Spence, you better get out of the room now while you've got the opportunity. Talk outside.
Okay.
Wonderful.
So much earlier in the evening, gents.
Well, I don't think they saw the funny side of that.
Like 10:40.
All right, gentlemen, does anyone wish to make an opening statement before we go to questions? A very brief opening statement.
Adam Cobb, Chief Executive Officer, Infrastructure Australia. No, Senator.
Thank you very much. Questions? Senator McKenzie.
Thank you. I had some questions around the South Australian High Productivity Vehicle Network access. The South Australian High Productivity Vehicle Network access has been listed on the priority list since 2019. Was Infrastructure Australia provided with the strategic freight studies or business cases for evaluation for the Greater Adelaide Freight Bypass, the Murray Bridge to South East Links, Swanport Bridge, and the Air Highway Widening and Upgrade Planning Study? Now, Mr Tucker, this is going to test your memory.
David Tucker, I'm the Chief of Project Advisory and Evaluation. Senator, we have had engagement just very recently in the last week around the work that South Australia have done on their high productivity vehicle network. Whether that contains the proposals you've mentioned, I do not have that information to hand. But they have done a program.
When you say engagement with South Australia on this, what does an engagement look like?
They've made in our language, a stage 2 submission, which is an options analysis for their program of work.
Right.
Where they've looked at a range of options and priorities for the network. So they submitted that to us about 2 weeks ago, and then we had a meeting with them last week. But it's too early to make any comment on that work.
Okay, so you've had them for about a week. Okay, if you've got them. You won't be able to answer those. I've got some questions on the CFMEU, and this is out to my team. You need to bring those questions up, please. Just some questions on the CFMEU on worksite. Is that something you would deal with, or would that be better? No.
No, it's not something we've dealt with in the past.
Okay, so while we're waiting, has Victoria finally given you the paperwork? I did see some news. So exciting.
Yes, Senator, they have.
So when did you get it, and what did it contain?
We had some further information provided, the majority of which came in December of last year.
And what was it? What did you get?
We got some information on greenhouse gas emissions, some information, the economic model, which is the spreadsheet in which all the calculations for the economic analysis. We got some further information on costs, so enough for us to start to move forward on an evaluation.
So if you got that in December, how long do your evaluations of their paperwork and evaluations take?
So we've completed an evaluation and we're currently going through a process of final checks with the Victorian Government.
Okay. How long will that take?
Generally takes a few weeks.
So in terms of the level of assessment you've undertaken of the SRL, you've checked their homework. There's clearly some anomalies, so that you're going back and checking with them whose figures match.
It is a standard practice that once we've completed an evaluation, we go through a fact-checking process with the proponent, and that's just to make sure that
everyone's happy. There's no one's going to be questioning.
Yeah, just to make sure that we've got all the facts right, all the numbers correct.
So when did you send that back to Vic?
Would have been about a week ago.
A week ago. Okay, so we're still... And typically that would take a few weeks.
Yep.
A few months? A few months.
We're waiting for feedback from the proponent. There might need to be some further discussion, but we hope to be able to complete it fairly soon.
Before Easter?
I hope so,
yeah. So that was just for SRL East or SRL?
Our evaluation was of SRL East.
Okay. And we heard earlier this morning that it's now a housing project. How has that changed your assessment?
It wouldn't change our assessment particularly. So most of these mass transit projects, these metro type projects, tend to have an opportunity for housing uplift. So we're seeing that in the Sydney Metro projects. So there's a big focus on density around those stations. So we tend to focus on it as a transport project, but we have recognised in our evaluation that there's an opportunity for housing uplift around the stations.
Okay. So the issues around value capture taxes, fees, charges on property owners in Melbourne eastern suburbs to raise up to additional $12 billion of funding for SRL East been part of your consideration of the project?
It has been part of our consideration.
Yeah. Because as I understand it, have you made any recommendations thus far to the federal government around your assessment of SRL East?
Yes, we've provided advice through the department, which is our evaluation at that stage.
So your initial evaluation of their paperwork you've sent to the department, to the minister, and whilst you are undergoing the sort of fact-checking exercise.
Yeah, they're just final
Victoria.
fact checks and things. Yeah,
and then you will then report that back to the department for the minister's advice, or is that sort of an irrelevant? The assumption is that it's an agreed. The numbers are agreed.
The findings of our evaluation are set, and the final fact checks of individual numbers, making sure that it's positioned correctly is.
My actuary agrees with your actuary.
Indeed.
Yep, got it. Have you made any recommendations to the government in relation for Victoria's request for an additional $9.3 billion funding for SRL?
So what we're focusing on in our evaluation is making sure we provided some advice on ensuring that the $2.2 billion is spent on tangible, I think someone said no regrets investments, so land acquisition, those sorts of things. And we've made some, we've provided our perspective on the evidence that might be required for further investment going forward.
So when the minister speaks publicly about the hurdles, are they your hurdles that you might have advised her need to be overcome to get a gold stamp from Infrastructure Australia for this project?
So we haven't seen what was put forward to the Victorian government. We've just provided our advice to the department, and then that has moved forward through the government system. So I'm not sure what the hurdles are, but in our evaluation we've made some observations around the need for appropriate evidence for further investment.
Yeah, so I mean, how is land acquisition no regrets?
So it's a tangible investment as opposed to things like contingency or project management.
Yeah.
It's something that you have.
We've got land.
You've got land.
We can do things with it. Do you consider the value capture options realistic and achievable to raise the $12 billion?
We haven't taken a perspective on that, but we have taken a perspective on what we would need to see in order
to be comfortable. Have you raised the risks with such an approach for the government's consideration?
I think we've just made, we've provided observations on the evidence, as I've said, that would be needed.
All right. I think I'll leave that there. And just some questions on the report in the Courier Mail and the TV news bulletins around Infrastructure Australia's draft list cut Queensland projects from 29 down to 7, and the projects axed from the list included the Sunshine Coast Direct Rail Stages 2 and 3, the Gold Coast Light Rail, the Ipswich Motorway and the Inland Rail. Can you confirm that you've axed those projects from your priority list?
We have been consulting on a new infrastructure priority list for about 10 months. So we've worked closely with all jurisdictions on identifying the highest priority investment ready proposals in each of their jurisdictions. So we have shared some initial projects with the Queensland Government and indeed all jurisdictions. The Queensland Government is in a particularly special situation because it's a new government. They're doing a 100-day review. So they haven't been able to confirm with evidence for all the proposals that they'd like to have included. So we're continuing to consult with them on their future priorities. So they've identified some more priorities, including future stages of direct Sunshine Coast Rail. So we're just waiting for further evidence to support that.
Sorry, future, say that.
Future stages
of
direct Sunshine Coast Rail.
Inland Rail?
Inland Rail was assessed by Infrastructure Australia in 2016.
Yes.
All major contracts have now been let, so it has been removed from the list in 2021. It's funded and underway. So Inland Rail was removed quite some time ago, and it's a good news story. It's under delivery.
Good news story, it's under delivery. For those who didn't hear, that's good to hear. I need to understand, has the Minister herself provided any direction to Infrastructure Australia around the priority list?
Certainly not on any of the projects. We briefed the office and the Minister at times on the strategic direction that we're taking, which I think is pretty normal behaviour, and we've had conversations around that.
And you're still in consultation with the Queensland Government about what's on and off and why,
Yes, and
so that they can...
Yep, and the evidence that we'll need to see in order to support their priorities.
Okay. Have you consulted with the Queensland Government since the 27th of January?
We've had a meeting with officials a couple of weeks ago.
A couple of weeks ago? Yep.
And we explained our evidence requirements and we take on board the feedback from the government.
Fantastic. I look forward to catching up on what the priority list looks like. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you, Senator.
Right, thanks, gentlemen. Travel safe. We now call the ARTC and Inland Rail.
Can't believe you doubted us.
Neither can I. And I'm very comfortable. Okay, welcome, gentlemen. Do either of you wish to make a brief opening statement?
No, Senator.
No, Senator.
Thank you. Questions? Senator McKenzie.
Thank you. Welcome, gentlemen. Okay. Can I have an update on the status of the, I'll get this wrong, Ilabo to Stockinbingle section?
Thanks, Senator. Yes, that's Illaboo to Stockinbingle.
Illaboo.
That is the first greenfield section of Inland Rail, 38 kilometres of greenfields work. Probably the highlight is on Friday we completed the last of the land acquisition, which is great.
Congratulations.
All sites are settled. The alignment's been finalised. We've appointed a contractor, John Holland Group, to do the design and construction. They're underway with preliminary design works and early works for the package. We expect to be into full delivery of construction by mid-year and certainly next earthworks season.
Great. Total cost of that project?
Yes, Senator, thank you.
Illaboo.
Yes, that section I to S has a cost of $478.7 million.
Okay. An update on the status of the Narromine to Narrabri section.
Yes, Senator. As we mentioned at the last estimates, we'd secured the environmental approvals for all but 13 kilometres around the Moree area. Now that work has been underway. We're advised in November by the Department of DPHI that a further public exhibition would not be required. We are working through the detail of some cumulative effects of hydrology between Transport for New South Wales and Inland Rail, where our projects align, the Newell Highway and the alignment of Inland Rail, and responding to some additional requests for information for that EIS.
So in terms of our properties that still need to be acquired?
Yes, there's a number still need to be acquired there, Senator, as we're working out the detail of the hydrology. On that section, we have acquired one property of 6, so 17% complete.
All right. And funding for construction?
Yes, Senator. We obviously have the funding envelope of $14.5 billion for the approved project works, which is everything south of Parks, double stacked by the end of 27, which we're on track for, and the approved project works north of Parks, which includes the land acquisition, the EIS approvals, and preliminary design.
When do you start compulsory acquisitions?
So compulsory acquisition has been utilised south of Parks because that section is funded.
Yep.
We had 18 properties that were subject to PANS notices. 17 of those properties were secured through a voluntary basis. One was an absent landowner. In the north, we've been working with TFNSW under their current policy. Compulsory acquisition is not supported, and this is the same with TMR in Queensland, unless the construction element is funded. Now, we just had confirmation on Thursday from TFNSW that they will support compulsory acquisition of inland rail in the northern New South Wales section, so that's a positive move.
That's positive.
Yes.
The Hunter Line is the ARTC's most profitable network. It cross-subsidises the rest of the Australian network. Why is this critical link not prioritised as part of this project?
Senator Wayne Johnson, CEO, ARTC. When you say not prioritised as part of this work, can you just describe that to me?
Well, is it a priority?
Absolutely. So it's one of the most essential parts of the rail network on the East Coast. In terms of just putting it in perspective around the linkage of the Hunter network to what is the future inland is probably the easiest way to describe that. So the heavy haul network stretches from Newcastle to a place called Tarrawan, just south of Narrabri. And just recently, RTC has finished commissioning the work that bridges the gap between what was Tarrawan and the inland rail. And so that upgrade work connecting to Narrabri and North Star that's now complete means consistent ton axle loading from Moree to the Port of Newcastle and vice versa.
Great. Where are we at with Queensland? We've had a change of government. Have we had a change of attitude to the benefits of the inland rail to that great state?
We're having positive engagement with both TMR and QR in relation to pushing forward with inland rail. We submitted the EIS from Border to Gary in November, late November, for adequacy. 60% of the chapters are now met the adequacy requirement and have been sent for publication. And the balance we're working through over coming weeks with the Office of the Coordinator General. We've had a very cooperative engagement with the OCG's office.
Okay, excellent. And I've had a really great tour since we've last seen each other, thanks to the passionate advocate for the inland rail, Mark Colton, who's retiring. But he's got a great replacement in Jamie Chaffey, who joined us. When will the final stage of the Narrabri to North Star project start, and when will it finish? That's a question Jamie's asked me to ask you.
Well, our expectation is in terms of the EIS approval, it will be in Q3 this year for those 13 kilometres.
Great. Yep. And that's the only thing that's holding up those last few kilometres?
That is correct. That gives us full planning approvals through to the Queensland border, and with the recent advice from TFNSW regarding support of compulsory acquisition, we can push on with the land acquisition as well.
Great work. Super positive. I just had a couple of questions about CFMEU on work sites within the project. I've had alarming reports from small to medium businesses that the CFMEU have been threatening contractors bidding for work with the ARTC and Inland Rail telling them that unless their workforce is unionised, they'll not get a contract. Are you aware of any CFMEU activity on your projects?
Yes, I am, Senator. On the Beveridge to Albury Tranche 1, the CFMEU was represented there for McConnell Dowell. We had some emerging issues during March possession last year around working in high temperatures during the possession. That's really the only issue we've had. The Minister required a review of middle of last year of our contracts, or of Inland Rail per se. We undertook a review and provided feedback to the Minister in relation to our engagement strategy, our code of conduct, etc. There was a whole series of communiques went out to not only our staff but also the contractors' staff around the whistleblowing opportunities, etc., through the code of conduct. And we really have not had a lot of union attention on the alignment because it's a regional project, I think.
Right, because I've had some, well, we've seen in Queensland and Victoria the standover tactics engaged by union officials on government projects. So other than that one incident, you haven't been made aware of any others? What measures have you put in place or are in place in the current procurement processes internally to ensure that there is no union interference in the bidding process for projects?
You can go in.
Senator, just rounding out, you mentioned RTC as well on that, so just to confirm that RTC also had the same review of any of the contracts we have in place, more on a maintenance perspective though, more so than construction, and confirm, similar to Nick, that there is no issues being founded. Nothing is presented across all of the contracts we have afoot. Now, in terms of the procurement process, we have pretty open tendering process in across most of the maintenance activities. We've got a number of controls in place then for vendors about what agreements they might have with staff, so that we're clear on those entitlements. But there's nothing has raised up of any concerns at this point.
So there's no requirements within your procurement procedures that might preference one contractor over another regarding union activity or affiliation?
No, absolutely not.
Excellent.
There's an assurance framework that's established as part of our procurement processes, and industrial relations is one element of that is investigated.
Is there any part of the procurement process that requires a disclosure of union activity or workforce?
Yes, there is.
Can you walk me through that?
There's a statutory declaration process as part of the procurement process around lawful engagement of unions, or unlawful engagement of unions, sorry. So that's part of our procurement process, yep.
Okay, thank you. That's it for these guys for me.
Cool, gentlemen, thank you very much. Travel safe, and we will now call High Speed Rail Authority.
Thank you.
Okay.
Now, Mr. Parker, while you make yourself comfortable, do you wish to make a brief opening statement before we go to questions?
No, thank you, Chair. I'm happy to take questions. I think it's quite late in the evening for you all.
Thank you.
Thank
Senator
you.
Mackenzie.
Thank you. It's been reported that a significant proportion of your budget has been allocated to consultancy services. How does this marry with the government's mission to get rid of consultants?
This is a matter we discussed at the last time I appeared before the Senate. The business case requires a significant number of different specialists, and we also had a relatively short time. HES is a new organisation. We don't have a big staff. So we went out and we brought in, through the Commonwealth procurement guidelines, we brought in various specialists to help us produce the business case.
A consulting firm, GHD, was contracted for over $760,000 to provide First Nations advisory, participation and engagement services. What has this money delivered specifically?
Yeah, sure. There's two contracts. One contract, I apologise, it is not a clear name. It's called First Nations Culture and Heritage Assessment. What it should have been is Cultural and Heritage Assessment, including First Nation. So in other words, it covered all culture and heritage assessment. The requirement to do culture and heritage and native title is very much part of the Infrastructure Australia guidelines to do a business case, so we had to do it. What it does is it goes across the whole corridor, and we've got over 140 kilometres of corridor. And what we're looking for there is what are the areas that have got heritage significance. Obviously, particularly places around the Hawkesbury, there isn't much information around, so that identifies and that helps us optimise the final alignment and actually understand where all the particular cultural and heritage issues are. And the reason you do that up front is obviously so that when you move to the next stage of planning approval, you've actually got information on that, which could impact the cost and the programme of the works.
So was any of that $760,000 go to First Nations people or?
Yes, there was a number of subcontracts with First Nation.
Sorry?
There was a couple of contracts with First Nation subcontractors as part of that GHD
How
engagement.
much of the $760,000?
If you could just hang on for a second, Ms. I shall come back to that.
Thank you.
For the cultural and heritage, the company was, excuse the pronunciation, it's Nglawa Nura Project Management Property Services. Their portion of the contract was around $130,000.
And what component of the contract did they do?
They would be providing specialist advice on the First Nation type sensitive issues. So GHD would have picked up the general, and they would pick up the specialist.
Okay, and the second contract?
There was another contract which was around the participation engagement, and the subcontract value there was the same company, and the subcontract value there was $11,000.
11,000. So of the 760,000 First Nations advisory, First Nations got 141,000.
As I said, Senator, of the contracts, there was one contract that was very specific just for First Nations, and that was the engagement one, which had a budget of around 200,000, and that was the 11,000 one. The second contract, I apologise for the confusion, but that wasn't purely First Nations, so that covered all the cultural. But of their elements, they had 130.
And assess the entire corridor?
Yes, we go from end to end.
Wouldn't there be multiple First Nations owners through the corridor?
There was a significant number. If you just give me a second, Miss, I've got some notes on it, because I thought this may come up. On the culture and heritage sites, we identified more than 4,000 sensitive sites around the land. It formed part of the constraint mapping exercise that we did, which overlaid with the alignment. Again, when you do these, you look at all the constraints, whether it's geotechnical, sensitive cultural, that type of thing.
Do any of the 4,000 cultural heritage issues relate to land claims or native title at all?
I can't give you, I'm afraid I haven't got that information. I suspect that they do, but I can come back to you on that.
Yep, okay.
That's usually when they say a sensitive site, it's either, it usually is, but I'd have to come back and find out of that 4,000.
So can I just understand that there were two, one was a $500,000.
One was 500,000.
Sorry, yes.
And that was the culture and heritage assessment.
And that was where First Nations organisation got $11,000.
No, sorry, Minister, that was the one where they got 120.
Right. Let me just draw that line on my bit of paper. And the $760,000 contract.
No, there was a 500,000.
Yes.
And a 230. That's how you get the 700. There's two contracts that
got
make
it.
up. And then
so of the 230, 11,000.
11,000.
Whew. Not a great return. I want to ask about the high-speed rail business case. So you've handed the business case to the government, and I want to be clear that that's a final business case.
What we've done, Senator, is we have completed the business case.
Well, a business case isn't always a business case. Is it a detailed business case?
It's a very good question. It's a very good question. If you give me just a little bit to clarify.
Yes.
So we were tasked to deliver a detailed business case to the government in 2024.
Mm-hmm.
We delivered the business case to government on the 16th of December. Currently, that business case is now being assessed by Infrastructure Australia. And it is also being reviewed by, obviously, government and by the department. And part of the work we're now doing is obviously answering any questions. And so that business case may get, depending on the queries we get, may need to be updated. But it's fundamentally a business case that's finalised after the assessment's completed.
Okay. So the project website's been updated to say the proposal covers 194 kilometres of tracks, including 115 kilometres of tunnels, and is proposed to be delivered in 2 stages. So I want to understand 2 stages, from where to where and where to where.
Sure. Again, a helpful warning with this, Senator, in that, again, it's a proposal and government haven't made a decision.
All the above caveats noted.
Okay, thank you. So, as you know, when we first came here, you asked where was the line going to go from, and we said it will go from Central, and then Central Coast, and then Newcastle. That is one of the stages. The second, and that's broken into 2, basically between Central Coast and Newcastle, and Central Coast and Central.
Yep.
And then the second stage, or the third stage, would be from Central through to Western Sydney Airport.
Oh, okay.
Via Parramatta.
Right. And those 3 stages was 194 kilometres.
That's correct.
115 kilometres of tunnel.
Yes.
Got it. What stage is recommended for delivery first?
The first stage would be the Central to, so Newcastle to Sydney section, because that is the, if you like, the priority. There's 15 million passengers a year currently use that.
And growing.
And that will, it picks up all of the Hunter, and also currently the people travelling that line are spending 2.5 hours, and the high speed will do it in an hour.
So what's the estimated cost for that first stage?
I can't give you that at the moment, Senator. Again, it comes back to when the assessment's been complete, and also when government's made the decision on how many stations they want and various other matters. I wouldn't like to give you a figure that could be misleading.
No, I don't want any misleading figures either. How do you propose that this could be funded? Proposing a PPP. Is that part of the detailed business case you provided, a proposed funding model?
We've given some options again to government. It's ultimately a government decision on how it's funded.
Yes.
We see opportunities for some private investment, particularly on some of the systems and that type of thing, that you can actually measure performance over time. And of course, there may be something with some of the property as well.
Like value capture along the...
we've stayed away from value capture, Minister. We've certainly considered
I
it.
don't think Infrastructure Australia is a huge fan of.
Well, I think there's challenges with value capture as we found through many other projects.
Yes, this is true. So what are the next steps, including key milestones?
So the next steps, Senator, I think it all comes down to Infrastructure Australia must complete their assessment, and governments needs to complete their assessment. And then from there we'll get advice on what they would like us to do next. If government wish to proceed with the project, we'd then move into the next stage of delivery, which will start a development phase.
So we discussed it this morning, and you might not have been tuned in to RAT estimates, but we were discussing how the Melbourne Airport Rail project, for instance, which was meant to be a public-private partnership and cost taxpayers, $5 billion, is now a $13 billion project and growing. And even the Victorian government's latest sort of range has a lot of movement. Recognising all the caveats you've outlined, what is the range of this project in its 3 stages?
I'd rather I didn't say, Senator.
I know you'd rather not say, Mr Parker.
The reason is not because I'm being difficult.
You can only not say if you're claiming a public interest immunity.
No, what I'm saying is that I'm also got to give you a truthful answer. So I think it comes down to, ultimately it comes down to government's decision on what they want to do, when they want to do it, the programme. There's so many variables. Until we actually get that advice, any number I give you or any range...
You've just done a detailed business case.
Yes.
So you're the best person that I've seen today, Mr Parker, who could actually give me a number that is in the ballpark of how much this project could cost.
But Senator, I could give you a number, but it could be...
You've just done the detailed business case.
No, I could give you a number, but what I'm saying to you, Senator, and look, we've seen this on countless other projects where numbers are given too early, people then jump and say they're either too expensive...
So is your business case detailed enough to actually, for the Minister to actually make a decision on?
The business case is detailed to make a decision. What we need the Minister and the Infrastructure Australia to do is to go through the business case. The business case is a substantial document. It's about 250 pages, and then there's about a further... in total, it's over nearly 13,000 pages. So very detailed, technical...
But no cost?
No, there are costs in there, Senator, but it comes down to the configuration and the timing, the number of stations. There's a whole range of things.
I appreciate that. So then that's why I asked for a range.
Yeah, and what I'm saying to you is there's too many variables to give you a figure that would not necessarily be misleading. And I don't want to give a misleading
Was
figure.
it a 4 or 7% cost-benefit analysis result?
We ran on a 4% discount rate, and we did sensitivity around a 7 as well.
So it was very detailed, but you were unable to give this committee the range.
I don't think it'd been appropriate without getting further information from government on exactly the time they want, the stations they want, because otherwise what will happen is the number will either be too large, too small and unrealistic.
Oh, and you'll get reminded too, don't worry
That's
about that,
why
They'll be on you
you
like
do a
ton of
detailed
bricks.
business case that the government's going to make a decision on.
Yes, and when the government make the decision, then they'll be able to give me the information that I need to firm up what the range of the cost is.
How will the existing high-speed rail system integrate with existing public transport systems in Sydney, Newcastle and intermediate regions?
So the proposal, Senator, is that this will be a standalone high-speed rail. And by that I mean that we have looked at opportunities to improve the existing network. We see the real advantage of high speed being a standalone network. Also, the impact on the existing line to try and modify it wouldn't actually give the time-saving benefits. What we will be doing is integrating it at certain points so that you can actually access the high-speed rail from existing metros, Sydney trains, buses and the like. So it'll be a combination.
Are we tunnelling from Central to Parramatta?
That is the most likely option, yes, Senator.
Oh, that's very expensive.
Sorry?
We'll be definitely doing stage 3 last. Minister, the Albanese government came to office and immediately set about cutting and delaying projects because of what your government called industry capacity constraints. You're now proposing the single largest construction project in Australia with 115 kilometres of tunnels. How can you turn around just 18 months later from the 90-day review that cut billions of dollars of projects right around the country and say that miraculously the market now has capacity to deliver this project?
Well, I can certainly say, Senator, and just listening to the comments by Mr Parker, he's correct. It is under consideration in terms of the Minister, and we have no doubt and have said throughout today and through all the questions around investment in infrastructure that the Minister is very focused on wanting to see that occur, whether it's on this particular project or any investment across the country.
So suddenly the market's recovered and there's capacity within it to deliver a project of this magnitude?
I think it's fair to say, Senator, that the market, particularly in the rail sector, other than suburban rail loop, there's not much market for rail at the moment.
What are you guys doing now that you've submitted the business case?
So we're currently, we are providing assurance. So in other words, we are picking up some queries from Infrastructure Australia.
Okay. So if they've got questions about your detailed business case,
they're doing that. I think you've just been through the similar to, not similar to suburban rail, but again,
careful, Mr. Parker.
I know they're asking us lots of questions, so we're answering them. We're also asking questions for the department about some detail. So that's what we're doing. We're also looking, Senator, at when you finish the business case, we're also looking at where are the opportunities to actually de-risk the work as well. So they're the sort of things that we're looking at.
So the business case was delivered under budget. So what ongoing funding do you have, and how is that profiled over the forwards?
Our funding, we were given 78.8 towards the business case. 70 of that was to cover direct costs, so consultancies and advisory, and then the other 8.8 was departmental.
And how much of that did you spend?
So the business case, of the 70, we spent 52.8.
Right.
On the sort of departmental costs, and we just use this as a starting point, we used 1st of July 23 till now, we spent 9.9. So to date, the authorities expended 62.7.
Why did your administrative costs go over by $1.1 million?
Because it covered.
$1.1 million in.
No, so it went from 23, Minister. So that was all the set-up costs as well.
Right.
So it's almost 2 years.
2 years. But you went over budget. What drove that by that amount?
Sorry, well, we also had other funding as well, Minister. So we had departmental funding for setting up HESRA, and then we were given additional funding, which was the additional 8 points for the business case staffing and that type of thing.
Now, my question still remains. You were given 8.8 and you've spent 9.9.
Sorry, Minister.
What was the overrun for?
No, so we were given more than 8.8. We were given 8.8 for the business case, and we were given additional funding for setting up HESRA. I'm just trying to get the figures for you exactly.
So what was the 9.9 against then?
The 9.9 is what I was trying to give you is a feel for how much we've spent totally. Sorry, it was different to funding. I was trying to be really open to say all the costs for HESRA since it started
is 9.9.
Is 9.9.
We got 8.8 for the business case admin funding, plus the other funding you're about to give me.
The other funding which I'm just looking to get to you.
Thank you.
Yeah, so we had I think we had another 9. I'm just trying to get the figure exactly, Minister.
Please.
We're going to get to our last 2 witnesses.
We got 9. I think.
Shall I let them go?
No, we'll get there.
I really apologise to you people out the back still waiting.
Well, we go till 11. Someone's
and
got
I'm
to
telling
be at
you
11
now,
o'clock.
I will be out of here at 11 o'clock on the dot.
Someone's got to be here at
'Cause I've got things to do tomorrow morning.
10:55. We're on track. Yeah.
Last witness was at 10:45, so not far off.
How'd you go there, Mr. Parker?
Can I just take that one on notice for a little bit while I ask one of my observers just to work back?
Trouble is, this will be...
No, I'll get it for you, Minister.
Sorry.
You're enjoying that, aren't you?
I love that. During the day, I call them up on it.
I do apologise, Senator. I was looking at the wrong number. We got an additional 9.8 in 23-24, 4 in 24-25, and another 4.095 in 25-26.
And of that, you've spent 9.9 year to date.
Yes, not year to date, to date, from the beginning of 23.
Thank you. Yes, to date. Okay, thank you, gentlemen. Much appreciated.
Very good.
Answer.
Thank you. So we can call the Office of the National Rail Safety Regulator.
Oh, sorry.
Looks like your mate's been cutting sick out there today, mate. Oh, this one here. She's saying around there's a wonderful place for
Lose the
you.
election because of it.
Yes.
This is true, Matt. Thank you for that. Yeah.
No, she came in, she got the wrong area, then she disappeared.
Okay. Is this it? We've only got 2?
Iranian women have a voice.
Great.
Good. I want everyone to hear that. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay. Welcome, Miss Pelham.
Yeah,
Pelham, thank you. Did you want to make a brief opening statement?
No, I'm
Okay,
just happy to answer your questions.
Fantastic.
Thank you.
So
Doctor, isn't
I'm wanting to continue to ask questions around train lighting. And you also let this committee know on the 29th of May 2024 that you had received the second Monash IRT research report that you'd commissioned on train illumination. Which road user groups, road safety experts and stakeholders participated in these studies?
Well, the Monash Institute of Rail Technology ran the process. Yeah. There was a couple of advisory groups that were part of that process.
Mm-hmm.
I can't remember all of the names of the different parties that were on it, so I'm certainly happy to just make sure I provide that to you separately. But off the top of my head, if you're happy with that response, there was certainly the representatives of the 2 train operators, so that was Pacific National and Horizon. And then there were other road safety specialists and also people that had knowledge of luminescence and the technology that's used these days to actually measure the brightness of light emanating from a train versus the background to determine whether or not you can actually see. So this is the measurement of luminescence is sort of the standard of how you actually measure conspicuity.
Is there a reason you didn't release the report till September?
No, we just we got the report, we reviewed it. There was some commentary that needed to be reviewed by the parties that were involved. So we sent it around to the parties that were involved. When those comments came back, those were sent to Monash. There was nothing that was particularly needed to change the report, but given they were participants, it made sense to give them an opportunity. I understand that is Monash's process. That's how they run that. So we facilitated that process for them. And when we had the final report, we released it.
Okay. What about those individuals and community organisations who've been very vocal in this space around ensuring trains are better lit, and so we do reduce the road toll as a result? Did you choose to share this report with them prior to its public release, or receive any feedback from them?
Not on that actual report. That was up to Monash because it was their report. But we did give them advance notice of what was in the report and also when we would be publishing it. And as soon as we published it, we also sent them information about that release.
Regarding the report, this committee received evidence on the 29th of May that there is doubt about whether the benefits and the costs would really be worth it. Who expressed doubts about the benefits and the costs?
So my understanding, when the ministers first considered whether or not they should be mandating lighting on trains, or whether or not there was some other option like the code of practice, which is what they finally went with, the discussion was around two things. One, getting something done as quickly as possible, and an approved code of practice takes around 18 months, whereas, as you'd probably be aware, legislation can take 2 to 3 years, particularly going through a national process. So that was one consideration. The other consideration was whether or not lighting, extra lighting on trains would actually be demonstrated as the right solution through a cost-benefit analysis. So that was where there was some doubt around whether or not that would be demonstrated. And the reason there was doubt was because the vast majority of incidents, whether those are near hits or collisions, so 81% of near hits and 74% of collisions occur during the day. And so one of the reasons we also did the research was to try and get some understanding and have some modern research that said whether or not lighting during the day and lighting during the night would help. And so the lighting during the day wasn't proven to be significant. So at that point in time in May, what I was trying to explain was why there were some doubts around whether a cost-benefit analysis would show that the lighting would solve the problem, given most incidents occurring during the day.
Okay. So there was no independent assessment of cost and benefits?
No. When you do an approved code of practice, because the approved code of practice is not considered mandatory, you don't have to do a cost-benefit analysis, so that wasn't needed.
Okay. Did you conduct a risk assessment regarding the information which rail safety national law requires?
Yes, so the code of practice itself, now that we've released it, it actually sets out the process by which you should assess the risk. It looks at 4 areas in particular that relate to level crossings. So it looks at the train control protection systems, it looks at the traffic management devices, it looks at line of sight, and it also looks at conspicuity, whether or not you can see the train.
So you can understand, given that the Rail Industry Standards and Safety Board is owned and operated by railway companies, how there could be a perceived conflict of interest by broader community on how these types of issues are dealt with and resolved. What steps and measures, frameworks, what comfort, what things can we put in place to really resolve that inherent mistrust?
I think the rail safety law is quite strong in that regard. So our role, and particularly this is what
I don't think people are feeling it.
Well, I think the code of practice is actually a big step forward, because there's been a lot of discussion and debate that it's not mandatory, which is true, it's not. But what it does is it actually sets out a process that rail operators need to follow, and that process would stand up in a court, so a court would test whether or not an operator had done the right thing in terms of complying with the code. But for us as a regulator, we also use it as a standard. So we've now written to all operators and asked them what their intentions are in terms of adopting the code or not. We've asked them to outline how they're going to address it, and if they're not going to adopt the code, we've asked them to outline how they're going to deliver at least that standard or better. And then
when do you expect to receive?
Yep, the end of February.
End of February,
was the date that we asked.
Will those responses be made public?
They won't be made public. Under the law, we have to keep certain information between us and a rail operator private. But what we will do is we will be using that to develop our forward education and compliance program. So we're going to go out and check just to make sure that things are happening the way that we expect.
All right, thank you. I will be following up at future days on that. That is it for me. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Doctor. Now,
Lucky last.
National Intermodal Corporation. Spring in your step there, Mr. Ballerstone.
Thank you, Chair.
Do you wish to make a brief opening statement?
I had a lengthy statement, but I think given the passage of time, we'll go straight to questions.
Thank you.
No, I don't have anything. I can talk you through our key achievements if you'd like to, Senator.
I can read your website. Beverage Intermodal Freight Terminal, what is the progress on that and how much equity has been released?
Yes, so we've made significant progress since we were last here. We are now in the final throes of the planning process with the Victorian Government. So we are hopeful of receiving approval sometime in the next couple of months. We have a contractor ready to go to start the first phase of works. So we'll be looking at turning soil sometime in the first half of this year. We have sufficient funding in relation to the beverage project, so effectively we have acquired the land. We've funded the full design of...
Okay. Thank you. I've got a series of questions.
Okay, fire
so
away.
no equity has been released because you haven't finalised
Yes,
that?
no, we've got equity in the land purchase, and,
right.
and we have obviously funding for the design process with our various constructors.
What is the current projections for the commencement of construction?
We'd like to commence construction in the next couple of months.
Next couple of months?
Yep.
Ooh. Completion?
We're targeting 1A to line up with Inland Rail coming in from Parks. So our aim is to have something in 2027 for 1A of beverage.
How do these timelines align with the Victorian Government's proposed upgrades to the Cameron Lane project?
Yeah, so Cameron's Lane will take a little longer. Now we're
How much longer?
So we're in discussions with the Victorian Government to do 2 phases of roadwork. So an initial roadworks to line up with 1A. So we'll fund some various roundabouts and things like that, and then there's also some interim works prior to Cameron's Lane in the time of around 27-28. Cameron's Lane it's a $1 billion investment, so that will take a bit longer than that.
So when you say the interim work 27-28,
so there'll be 3 phases of works. There'll be initial roundabout works for 1A, which are around 27.
Right.
There'll be some further more major works to enable larger trucks and more volume to come through, which will be around that 28-29 period.
Start?
Well, complete. We can't run our terminal until those works are in place, and then Cameron's Lane will be in that fullness of time.
Post 2030.
It hasn't been finally designed yet, so it's a bit early to comment on when that will be done.
You can't build it if it hasn't been designed yet. Ebenezer, what's the current state of planning with regard to proposed Ebenezer Inland Rail Interterminal near Ipswich?
Yes, so we are in very good conversations with Energy Developments Queensland, who own the site that we're looking at either acquiring or partnering with EDQ on. We've done quite a detailed indicative design, layout, costings of all of that. And I'm actually going to Queensland on Thursday to have some discussions with them around a potential model as how that can be developed. But we've got very good discussions, relationships with
And there's
EDQ.
nowhere else in Queensland you're looking at an intermodal?
No, at the moment that's the selected site together with the Queensland Government. And Ebenezer is the site that we're looking at for the completion of Inland Rail at the northern end.
Has the planning for this intermodal been delayed because the government's been focused on inland rail south of Parks?
No, we operate independently but very closely obviously with ARTC and Inland Rail. So we've been progressing the planning and the design, the development and the funding for that independent of that. We're looking at different models to early activate the site prior to Inland Rail being there. So, we are...
When's Inland Rail getting there?
That's a decision for Inland Rail.
Like, what's the indicative
I think,
time?
early to mid-30s is the one through there. But, again, we would like to see early activation, warehouse developments, intermodal aren't just a rail terminal. We obviously have the benefits of on-site warehousing as well.
And a progress update on Moorebank.
Yes. So
how much of the facility is now under lease?
About 2/3. So Woolworths opened up its state-of-the-art $1 billion facility a couple of months ago.
Excellent.
So fantastic.
The estimated level of return to be received this financial year from tenants and terminal users?
So when you're looking at return for National Intermodal or for the precinct itself? So it's a bit complicated. So we are obviously the landlord as part of going through there. So, you know, we delivered a profit last year of around $23 million. Last year, we've increased our asset base from about 400 million to 800 million over that same period. So our land holding is a very attractive proposition for us. So
terminal, how much do we actually get? How much does the Commonwealth get
so at the
from
moment,
Moorebank?
So
from terminal users and tenants.
Yeah. So we charge the developer of the terminal a ground rent. That's charged at $8.35.
It's a bit higher than that. It was $8.20 in 2017 and escalated at CPI.
Okay, so around $8.35. And that is grandfathered depending on when the land developers come into it. So it's a bit of a complicated formula to give you the precise answer. At the moment, we offset the ground rent on the equity we need to continue to build the facilities. We've just signed a contract to build a $100 million road that'll go around the outside of the facility. We're taking up Moorebank Avenue and moving it around the outside. So at the moment, the money that we make on ground rent is funded into our equity participation.
So the $23 million didn't go back to the Commonwealth?
That's offset against the equity we would have required elsewhere.
So nothing is the answer to my question.
Not as a dividend at the moment. Not as a dividend, correct. So through time, obviously when the construction finishes, that will then start to return a profit and a dividend to the Commonwealth.
And when do you anticipate that to be?
The late 2020s.
The late 2020s. Yeah. Thank you, Chair. Thank you,
Senator
gents.
McKenzie.
Thank you, Minister.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Committee.
Thank you.
Gentlemen, travel safely. Dr Emma, thank you very much. To your crew, once again, superb. Hansard and Broadcasting, as always, thank you very much. Minister, good night. That concludes today's hearing. The committee now stands adjourned. Thank you.